Growing up, we've all heard the crazy stories from Uncle Tommy about the unexplainable things that happened around his farm. It wasn't uncommon for him to make frantic calls to the house in the middle of the night, hoping that Dad would be within reach. And he would always answer and stay on the phone until he deemed it reasonable to hang up. His patience, it seemed, started and ended where Uncle Tommy was concerned. His absurd claims ranged from being frequently woken up by blood-curdling screams echoing endlessly into the night, mysterious and vicious attacks on some of his horses and cows, to the constant feeling of being watched by something. That presence, he said, followed him day and night across the property, like a vulture waiting for the carcass to finally drop. His words, not mine. To me, it feels more like a noose slowly tying around your neck. Back then, my little sister Abby, musical as she was, even made a little nursery rhyme about him, and she would proudly sing it every time Dad recounted some of his brother's wild tales. Crazy Uncle Tommy, kooky as a bat. Tell me, Uncle Tommy, where did you leave your hat? Crazy Uncle Tommy, so the story goes. Tell me, Uncle Tommy, where did your cows go? Not her best work in the rhyming department, but it served the purpose of a childish taunt that would drive our dad mad with frustrated anger. Mom would usually try to intervene, explaining to us, the kids, that Uncle Tommy was simply too country and set on his ways. She also said that growing up in an isolated rural area had made him superstitious, and although we shouldn't take his stories seriously, we shouldn't make fun of him either. He was Dad's only remaining family, and we should treat him with the same respect we treated Dad. Abby wouldn't even bat an eyelash at Mom's complaints. I guess that, to her, she was treating Uncle Tommy with the same respect she did Dad, which was to say, none. She was a firecracker of a little kid on her best days, and an uncontrollable nightmare on her worst. Still, on days like today, when my only companion is Uncle Tommy's trusted old rifle, I find myself missing her more than ever. At that time, the middle of nowhere Utah was the last of places I would have chosen to spend the summer vacation of 1999. My heart was set on going back for my last hooray at Wild Bears Boy Scout camp, before I was considered too old and too much of a loser to still like kid stuff. Looking back, I was probably already too much of a loser anyway. Abby didn't want to go either. Her best friend Eloise was about to move away with her family for some sort of extended religious mission, and that summer would be their last opportunity to spend some time together. Either way, it wasn't like we were in a position to make demands. We were just kids after all, and Dad was adamant that we had to go spend some time with family. The fresh air and nature would be good for us, he said. I'm sure he came to regret that decision. Not too many days after that, we were all packed and ready to hit the road. Mom had her trusty map on hand, as it was always her job to be Dad's navigational consort when he was behind the wheel. The drive there was going to be a long one, she warned us in advance. Way too long for Abby, who, by hour 2, had already exhausted all her avenues of entertainment and had resorted to kicking the back of Dad's seat just to get a reaction out of him. Hey, settle down, will you? I said, holding her leg so she would stop with her tantrum. Dad's going to end up tossing you out into the middle of the road, you brat. My fondness for her must have betrayed my attempt at being stern because she just gave me a toothy grin as a response. Nonetheless, she calmed down after that, and I wasn't in the habit of looking a gift horse in the mouth. By hour 5, I was dangerously close to throwing a tantrum myself. The road seemed to go on forever, just an endless parade of trees all around us, and exhaustion, or plain old boredom, must have claimed me at some point because I fell asleep. It was well into the night when I woke up to the sound of my parents arguing in hushed voices about being lost. Even though she had checked and rechecked the path in advance, it felt like we'd been driving aimlessly, in circles. Looking back, that would have been the least of our problems. When we finally arrived, exhausted and irritated, Uncle Tommy was sitting on his porch waiting for us. The house was much older and decrepit looking than what I remembered. Granted, I didn't remember much since I'd only been there once before, months prior to Abby being born. She, on the other hand, only knew the place by word of mouth, so she immediately went into exploration mode, running around like a little wild creature. The first night was somewhat uneventful. We were all exhausted from the long trip and just wanted something to eat and rest, so we did just that. When morning rolled around, Uncle Tommy took us, Abby and I, to see the newest baby calf and help feed it since the mom had unfortunately died. There were a lot of young calves, but not as many adult cows, which I thought was odd. "What happened to the mom, Uncle Tommy?" Abby asked, her eyes almost as big and bright as the baby's, both staring at one another. "Labor was too hard on her, and she ended up not making it. She was an old broad already." "But will he be okay? The baby?" "The baby will be okay, don't worry. And it's a girl, by the way." Abby beamed at that, immediately resorting to using an even higher baby voice to talk to the newborn. This girl has some pipes in her, I thought. "They all are," Uncle Tommy later added as an afterthought. As Abby excitedly fed the baby with a bottle, I couldn't help but notice the somber expression on his face. Later that night, he pulled me aside to recount what he deemed to be the real story about the baby calves. Over a year ago, some variant of a mad cow disease that was going around the area claimed the lives of 2 of his prized bulls, his only bulls. All the other animals he had were females. As he was exploring other avenues to impregnate his cows without a bull in sight, he noticed that one of the cows was pregnant. At first, he said, he attributed it to a pregnancy that must have happened before the bulls died, even though he knew for a fact that the cow had not been inseminated at the time. By all accounts, none of the cows should be getting pregnant, but they were, one after the other, like a chain reaction. And they only gave birth to heifers. Even more mysterious was the fact that all the cows would lose their lives giving birth. They were all perfectly healthy cows that would simply stumble and die as soon as the delivery ended. That night, I went to bed thinking about all the wild stories I'd heard from Uncle Tommy. Could they be true? I've seen all the baby cows and the clear lack of mothers, so at least that one had to be true. It had to be. But if that in fact was real, then why wouldn't everything else? An ice-cold shiver ran down my spine when I remembered Uncle Tommy's recollection of the mysterious presence that followed him around. Suddenly, I too felt watched. Worse than that, preyed upon. I sat up in bed so fast that it gave me motion sickness, and my vision was covered in bright white spots. When my eyesight was finally normal, I found myself staring straight ahead towards the window and into the dark night. It was like someone had painted the outside with black ink. Why was everything so fucking dark all the time? Would it kill him to install some patio lighting or something? Except, there seemed to be something moving in the darkness. A shapeless sort of thing, not much different in color than the surroundings. I could barely make it from where I was standing, so, begrudgingly, I moved closer towards the open window. What was that? An animal? The shape seemed to morph as it moved, ever so slowly, bleeding into the edges of my vision and making a mess of my senses. What the fuck is that? But then, I didn't trust my eyes not to play tricks on me, so I let my ears guide my perception of what might be standing ahead. And my ears definitely picked up on something. As the shape moved, I could hear what seemed like muffled steps. Heavy, muffled steps, accompanied by an uncomfortable graveled sound that grew as the time passed. My body was suddenly frozen once I realized that I couldn't actually see the thing, just hear it moving towards me. Closer. It's getting closer. My mind was screaming at me just to close the fucking window and get out of the room. Hell, even hide under the covers. Do something, you fucking wuss. Anything, as long as it put some distance between me and whatever was lurking in the dark. Still paralyzed from fear, my eyes landed on Abby, sound asleep in the other bed across the room. If there was something out there, and I really felt like there was, I wasn't going to let it get to her. I was her older brother and I had to protect her. Easier said than done, of course. I still couldn't find the will to stretch my arms and close the window. When the noise had become way too clear for comfort, my arms finally decided to obey me and I closed the window in one swift motion. Finally, we were safe. Abby was still sleeping, none the wiser, and that's how I wanted her to remain. Sleep was out of the question, so I sat back on my bed and just stared at the closed window in front of me. In the morning, I'd go talk to Uncle Tommy about what had happened. He'd know what to do. At some point in the night, though, my eyes were simply too heavy to remain open, and I decided it was best to take a quick nap. I'd always been a light sleeper, so I was confident that I could wake up quickly in case something happened. There wasn't much time to rest, I don't think, as I was soon awoken by what I would definitely describe as blood-curdling screams. My heart was almost beating out of my chest as the memory of the sound rang, shrieked inside my ears. I barely had time to register that Uncle Tommy had been telling the truth about the screams, and probably everything else too, when my brain took notice that the screaming voice sounded a lot like Abby. Why the fuck did it sound like Abby? My legs were moving before I was even aware of my decision to get up, and I reached Abby's bed within seconds, pulling away the covers. She wasn't there. Not in the bathroom, not hiding under the bed or inside the closet. She wasn't anywhere in the room. "Abby!" I screamed, desperate to hear something back. "Dad! Mom! I can't find Abby!" Uncle Tommy was the first to come to the rescue, his trusty rifle in hand and dressed as though he was ready to jump out of bed at any given second. Soon after, Mom and Dad followed, in different stages of awakeness. Frantically, I paced around back and forth, explaining to them what had happened, that I couldn't find Abby anywhere in the room, and she hadn't responded when I called out for her. Neither Dad nor Mom heard the agonizing screams that woke me up, but Uncle Tommy had. I turned towards the window to tell them once again about the weird noises, only to realize that it was now open. I could swear it was closed less than a minute ago. I couldn't stop my voice from shaking when I asked, "Did any of you open the window just now?" Apprehensively, all three of them turned towards where my eyes were already glued. I was both relieved and disappointed to be met with the same darkness as before. The shapeless thing was nowhere to be found, but neither was Abby. Whatever suspended calm had been permeating the room was long gone once my uncle turned towards me. "Have you talked to it?" he asked, holding a small pocket knife, placing it over my trembling hands. "When it called to you, did you answer?" "What the fuck are you talking about, Tom? Abby's probably just hiding somewhere around the house, playing a prank on all of us." There was no time to find out what Uncle Tommy's answer would be, since the silence was shattered by unmistakable cries of pain coming from the front yard. Abby's cries. I grabbed a small lantern that stood on the bedside table and ran out of the bedroom and through the front door. I had to save Abby. It was probably my fault she'd gotten taken in the first place. I had to save her. The lantern did very little to guide me as I ran. I didn't even have time to put on some shoes, and it didn't take long for the rocky debris to start making small cuts on my exposed soles. I pushed through the pain and the fear, focusing only on finding my sister. As I reached what seemed to be one of the small tool sheds, a sudden movement in my peripheral startled me into dropping the flashlight on the ground. It rolled away from me on a gentle descent, showing bits and pieces of the path ahead. The fickle beam, as it stopped, settled on a hollowed tree trunk. Struggling to adjust to the darkness around me, I saw a glint of white crouching on the floor, however many feet ahead. Abby's pajamas are white, my brain immediately supplied, and relief washed over me. I found her, I thought. She'll be okay. "Abby!" I screamed to call her attention as I ran towards her. "What the hell are you doing out here? You almost gave me a—" "Crazy Uncle Tommy." My legs immediately came to a screeching halt, all the hairs on my body standing up. That wasn't... Abby didn't sound like that. Kooky as a bat. It sounded like as if someone, something, was trying to mimic what they thought a little girl would sound like. "Tell me, Uncle Tommy, where did you leave your hat?" It wasn't Abby. It wasn't Abby at all. The thing, this creature, unfolded itself from the rocky ground to reveal a frame that was neither human nor animal. It was lanky but big at the same time. A twisted, unholy mixture of both. Or maybe it was neither. I didn't know then, and I don't know much better now either. What I once thought were Abby's white pajamas were clearly not fabric. Fur. Splotchy, grayish-white fur, covering the creature as it twisted into shape until it was upright, staring right at me. I clutched the pocket knife in place just as the thing lunged at me. It all happened so fast. The flashlight was lost in the impact, and I was dragged across the uneven ground as the creature seemed to toy with me, unrelenting. It tossed me towards the tool shed when the back of my head landed painfully on a raised rock. Everything got hazy and distant after that. I was too weak to open my eyes, but I could hear it, approaching, stalking, taunting. I felt a heavy weight being placed over my chest, making it almost impossible to breathe. Then, the claws pressing down one by one. The pain was so intense that it startled my eyes open, and I was met with the most terrifying pair of eyes I'd ever seen. Glowing neon bright, just inches away from my face. Suddenly, they crinkled at the corners, getting much smaller, and I realized with dread that it was smiling. The fucking thing was smiling at me. When I tried to move away from it, I realized my grip was still firm around the pocket knife. If I was gonna die, at least I'd go down fighting. Psyching myself up with a powerful scream, I threw my arm against its body, hearing a shriek in response. Miraculously, it worked. I'd managed to get the creature with a slash on one of its bony arms, but that was it. I had no more fight left in me. I closed my eyes and waited for the inevitable, except it never came. Instead, I was greeted with my dad's and uncle's frantic cries. "We found her! Jake, we found her!" I don't know which of them carried me back to the house, but next thing I knew I was staring at my mom, holding Abby in her arms with an iron grip. She was clearly terrified, but didn't seem to be hurt. "Is she okay?" I asked Dad in what must have been a barely audible whisper. "She's fine. We found her hiding in the barn." As soon as Mom saw us, she ran towards the car, then gently placed Abby on the back seat behind her. "I'll drive, let's go! We have to take them to the hospital." Them? But Dad said she was fine. As if sensing my agitation, Dad placed a hand on my chest so I'd stop struggling. "It's just a scrape, Jake. She fell on the ground running back to the house. Bet she won't even need stitches." Dad put me behind the passenger seat, and I immediately relaxed when I saw that she was indeed practically unharmed. There were some twigs and leaves on her hair that I gently plucked away under her watchful eyes. She hugged me way too tight for the injuries on my chest, but I tried to remain strong. I didn't want her to be even more scared than she already was. The adults were still talking in exasperated voices, making plans that I couldn't pay attention to. The sheer, bone-deep exhaustion finally getting the best of me. When I woke up with a start, my eyes landed immediately on Abby. She was crouched against the door, clearly terrified, but somehow stable. The worst was over now, I repeat to myself over and over again like a mantra. Abby was safe, I was safe, and so were Mom and Dad. After leaving the hospital, we would get the hell away from that place and hopefully take Uncle Tommy with us. He couldn't stay there alone, not after everything that had happened. Beside me, Abby shivered in her sleep. I searched through one of our bags until I found a blanket and placed it gently over her. It wasn't particularly thick, but it would have to do for now. Her skin was still way too cold from staying outside for so long. When I ran my hand over her arms to provide further warmth, she instinctively recoiled from the touch. I stopped. There was something wet under the blanket. I lifted the fabric to find a bright red stain against the long sleeves of her pajamas. I couldn't understand. Dad made it seem like she'd only scraped her knees when she fell. He didn't say anything about... No. Please, no. My eyes reluctantly traveled up towards Abby's face, only to find her already staring. No, it can't be true. Glowing, neon-bright eyes crinkled at the corners, revealing an inhuman smile. Staring back at her, there was only one thought on my mind. That isn't Abby!